Today's daf we're going to be learning is Makkot daf Yochet. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with a quick review of yesterday's daf. We started with a mishnah of somebody who ate bikkurim without reading the mikra bikkurim, or ate kodshe kodshim, sanctified items outside the azara, chutz leklaim, or kodshe kalim v'et maaser sheni chutz lechoma. Okay, plus a number of other things, but those are the relevant ones. That you ate maaser sheni outside Jerusalem and kodshem kalim, you get lashes. To which the Gemara had said, this is Rabbi Akiva. To which they said, why did you say it was Rabbi Akiva? It's actually Rabbi Shimon. And then they answered, okay, we wanted you to know that Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Shimon. And they said, how do we know that this is Rabbi Shimon? And we brought a braita. Okay, today we're going to reread that whole braita and change it a little bit. And we'll see. But right now, what we've seen until now is a braita that went through one by one this pasuk, okay, which remember we ended with not exactly in the right order, but we went through this pasuk in chapter 12 that mentioned all the Maser Sheni and the Bikurim and the Kodshim and Kodshim Kalim, etc. And it mentioned them all in order to teach, right? We said we're going to have a Kavachomer, okay, that you could have learned everything Kavachomer from Maser Sheni, which is the topic, Lo tuchal lecho b'sharecha. You can't eat in your gates, meaning you have to eat in Jerusalem. All of those could have been learned from Kavachomer from Maser Sheni, and therefore there was no need to learn them. I'm just going to go very quickly through then what the braita said. The braita then said, it can't be teaching you chutz lechoma outside Jerusalem because for all those things have to be in Jerusalem, but we know that because of a Kavachomer. So we then learn that for all the things we're going to list, it's obvious that you have to eat them in Jerusalem. That's number one. Bikurim needs kriya. We said that's the unique halakha. We're basically saying each one was mentioned to teach unique halakha. Bikurim, that you need to do the mikra bikurim. Without that, you're going to get lashes. Again, what was the case? The kohen eats the bikurim when the original owner hadn't actually done the mikra bikurim, and then he gets lashes. The Toda and Shlamim were there to teach you that before the Zrikat Dam, if you eat it before the Zrikat Dam, usually you could eat it after the Zrikat Dam, the blood was spilled, but if you ate it before, you're going to get lashes. The halakha of Bechor was even after. If you're not a Kohen and you eat it, you're going to get lashes, even after the blood was spilled or poured on the altar. Chatat Asham teaches you even after Zrika, if you eat it outside the Azara, you're going to get lashes. That was what we saw, kodshe kodshim, outside the Azara, you get lashes. That was in the Mishnah. And the Ola, even after Zrika, and even if you eat it bifnim, since the Ola can't be eaten at all, you're going to get lashes. So that was all the things we saw. And then we said that each subsequent one, other than the bikurim, was not only for that, but each subsequent one built on the previous. Whatever was true for the previous is also going to be true for that. Okay, so when it came to the Ola, and this is going to be important, they're going to be in the end, since we had 6 things we learned, but one has to do with bikurim, starting with outside Jerusalem, right? Can't be eaten outside Jerusalem, can't be eaten before Zrika, can't be eaten by a non-kohen, can't be eaten outside the Azara, and can't be eaten at all. All those 5 are going to relate to the Ola, which we're going to get to today. So now the Gemara had a problem because they said, but you can't be masirim min adin. You can't give a warning. You can't say something's forbidden, and you get lashes for it if it's a kavachomer. So they say, fine, it's just an isur. It's actually not lashes like we thought, but it's just forbidden. To which they answered, okay, and this is the end of yesterday's daf, but didn't Rava say that zar shachamana ola lifnei zrikat lechoma Rabbi Shimon lo kechamesh, and that was the 5, because that's the ola that was eaten right before the zrika, outside the choma, and obviously outside the asara, and then you have all 5 of those isurim we talked about. You get 5 lashes, to which they answer, chamisha isurim havu. They're really only 5 isurim that you don't actually get lashes for. But now the Gemara says, how could you possibly say we don't get lashes? And this is the end of our review from yesterday, from Friday's stuff. But our Mishnah says you get lashes for these things. And right, some of the things mentioned in our Mishnah were in that braita. So we're stuck. So the Gemara is going to say it can't be that you learn, and particularly, right, we're concerned with the one we learned from Kavachomer, which is outside the Azara. Outside Jerusalem. If you eat them outside Jerusalem, we learned for all of them from a kavachomer, and even all the subsequent ones, each one was learned from the previous by a kavachomer. So the Gemara says, fine, forget the drasha of Rabbi Shimon. We're still going to learn all those 6 items that he learns, but krayeterahu. He learns it from not what we thought of a kavachomer. He learns it from an extra pasuk, and here let's read it. Michtitiv. Okay, now it says in the pasuk. We're now quoting Dvarim Yud chapter 12, the same chapter we were learning, but pasuk 6 vav. והבאתם שמה עולותיכם וזבחיכם ואמסרותיכם ואת תרומת ידכם ונדריכם ונדבותיכם בקרוב קרכם וצאנכם. Okay, it says you're going to bring there to Jerusalem. Now, previously, we read Dvarim Yud Bet chapter, the same chapter, verse 17, where it then said, you can't eat outside your gates, right? All those things. Now, there are also the things mentioned here. So, the Gemara is going to say, once it already said, "Ve'evetam shama, v'achaltum lifnei Hashem elokecha, b'makom asher yivchar," etc., lichtav rachmana lo tuchal ochlam. It should have just said in Pasuk Yud Zayin, verse 17, you can't eat them outside your gates, or right, lo tuchal echol b'sha'arecha, right? You can't eat them in your gates. They have to be in Jerusalem. Lo ochlam them, and you would have known exactly what it was referring to because it already mentioned them 10 psukim ago, 11 psukim ago. So Mehadar Mefarish Rabbanan Lam. At least, so why did the Torah need to go back and say them all? Now we're going to say it's not because you could have learned it from a Kavachomer about chutz lechoma lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, and therefore each one was said specifically to teach some new halakha. No, that's not the unique one because that would all be learned by Kavachomer, which we can't learn in Isser from a Kavachomer, or we can't learn lashes from a Kavachomer. So in the end, we're going to say this pasuk is unnecessary. All the details. In other words, it was important to say lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, but you could have just said don't eat them in your gates. The fact that it lists each one independently must be teaching you all these additional lo tases that we had in the braita. So they're just changing the beginning part of the braita. That ends our Rosh Hashanah Rabbi Shimon. But we're not exactly finished because we want to go back to the statement we said at the end of yesterday's daf, which is Gufa, Amar Rava. Rava said, Zar sha'achamana ola lifnei zrika chutz lechoma Rabbi Shimon lokech chamesh. Now we're going to ask a question on this. Now, obviously, you're going to get 5 because we just said those 5 were all learned out from, right? Which again is an ola that was eaten in general. An ola that's eaten is forbidden, even if it's inside. If it's outside the Azara, that's an additional one. If it's eaten outside Jerusalem, that's another one. If it's eaten before you sprinkle the blood, it's another one. And if it's eaten by a non-kohen, it's also. Okay, so you end up with these 5 isurim. Now the Gemara is going to suggest, wait a minute, there should be more lashes to this, not just 5. Okay, and here we're going to go through. This pasuk is said in the Miluim. These are the days when the Kohanim sanctified the temple. They create, right, the very first days of the temple that it was kind of going into use, the consecration of the temple. So, or the Mishkan, actually, not the temple. But it says there the Kohanim are going to eat the sacrifices. They're these special shlamim, korbanot for the Kohanim. V'zar lo yochal ki kodesh hem. And there it says the zar can't eat it because they're kodesh. Here seems to be, now, this is a unique, right, ki kodesh hem, right, because Rashi says, because it says ki kodesh hem, and it gives a reason, because they're kodshe kodshim, okay, these were specific sacrifices that were kodshe kodshim, okay, even though I think they were, I just want to check one thing, I believe they were shlamim, maybe I'm confused. Yeah. Okay. I have to look that up again, but I forget which korbanot they were, but they were considered kodshe kodshim. Okay, these were specifically considered kodshe kodshim, but the kohanim would eat them. That's why I think they were shlamim. In any case, the point is here, there's a special pasuk that says because they're kodesh, the zar can't eat them, which means that before we said the zar can't eat even the bechor, which isn't kodshe kodshim, that's kodshim kalim. Now we're going to learn the zar can't eat. There's a special, in other words, it's not, obviously the zar can't eat even kodshim kalim, and therefore, of course, can't eat kodshe kodshim. But there's a special pasuk that says you can't eat also things that are kodshe kodshim. So that should be also applied to the ola, this unique isur lo taseh, in specifically that was in the time of the miluim, but you can apply that to any time there's kodshe kodshim. So they say no. because that's an exception. That was a case where the kodesh were permitted to kohanim, and therefore there's a unique isur that the zar can't eat them, the non-kohen. But in the ola, even kohanim can't eat it, and therefore there's no that unique for prohibition was only specifically to items that to meat, sacrificial meat that the kohen could eat that the zar can't eat. But it wouldn't apply to an ola because even a kohen can't eat it. Okay, second question. We're going to have a slew of these questions. Why don't we get lashes because of this? Which the simple reading sounds like you can't eat treif meat, right? Meat that's not kosher, meaning meat that was, an animal that was stabbed or something. But the drasha in this pasuk, okay, and that's the whole question, why there's all drasha in this pasuk, why we don't read it the simple way, but we'll leave that aside for right now. But fact is, the Gemara learns, or the rabbis learned that they learn an isur here, a prohibition, that if meat, okay, now before we were talking about a person can't eat meat that left the Azara, right? That's outside the Azara or outside Jerusalem. But here it's saying, if the meat left the place where it was allowed to be eaten, okay, like let's say kodshe kodshim outside the Azara, kodshim kalim outside Jerusalem, and then it comes back into the area where it can be eaten, it's disqualified. This is called, like we call it, this is maybe proof why we always say treifa. Treif meat is just non-kosher. It's disqualified meat, okay? It's not only, right? We use it, the Gemara uses it often, treifa is an animal that died or was stabbed and wasn't shechted. But treif is a general term that means it's a problem, you can't eat it. It's not kosher. So now they're going to say that once the meat leaves the place where it's allowed to be, and even if it comes back into the place where it's allowed, it's still forbidden. So therefore, why don't you say this ola that left, now there's a problem not just with the person eating it, but it's a problem on the meat itself. The meat itself becomes treif. Okay? So now they say, oh no, that's not going to apply to the ola because that only applies. That's only a case where we have meat that could actually be eaten inside. This is the theme we've been going with the other one also, right? There's no unique isur because the kohen even can't eat it. Here we're going to say there's no unique isur here of it left, and once it's left, the meat is not kosher, it's treif, because the meat was never allowed to be eaten in the first place, even inside. So here, it wouldn't even be allowed to be eaten inside, and therefore, of course, this wouldn't be a relevant issue. The lil kenami, okay, or it wouldn't be a relevant isur, right? It wouldn't be applicable in this case. Third time. The lil kenami to Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going back to the miluim, and the days of the miluim, it also said that if you leave over the meat, calls it notar, any meat that's left over beyond the designated time, lo yochal ki kodesh. Okay, again, it says you can't eat it because it's kodesh. Okay, turning now to amended, kol sheba kodesh pasul, right? So anything that is in the kodesh that becomes disqualified, like the basar miluim that now became disqualified because you left it beyond the designated time. Likewise, an ola that left, because remember our case. Okay, I'm just going to go back again. It's an ola before Zrika that went outside the gates of Jerusalem. So here we have disqualified sacrificial meat, same thing. And again, it says you can't eat it. But the Gemara is going to say the same thing they've been saying each time, which is, that the notar meat of the basar miluim is only a problem because there's a prohibition here because it could have been eaten if you hadn't left it over. Now that you left it over, you disqualified something that could have been eaten. But hacha dekodem psulo, here before you took it outside the gates of Jerusalem, nami lo chazi, it also wasn't worthy of being eaten. So this isn't relevant. Okay, fourth one. What about this other statement of Rabbi Elazar? Detanya, Rabbi Elazar Omer, Koshu bekalil tihiyeh, litain lo tasel chilato. What's kalil tihiyeh? This is a pasuk about the minchat kohen. Okay, the mincha of a kohen. If a kohen offers a korban mincha, usually the korban mincha is offered. It's a meal offering. Somebody brings a voluntary meal offering. What happens is they do a kmitza. The kohen takes his 3 middle fingers, takes out a bit of it, right? The kometz, burns it on the altar, and the rest of it is given to the kohanim to eat. But the mincha of a kohen has to be burnt completely, just like the ola. So they say, Rabbi Elazar said that anything that's kalil tiyeh, that has to be completely burned, is a special prohibition. Litain lo taseh lechilato. There's a lo taseh of eating it. Okay, because it says kalil tiyeh, if anybody eats it, they transgress a negative prohibition. Now that would apply completely to the ola, which is kalil tiyeh. Has to be completely burnt. So now they're going to say, inachinami, after right 3 failed attempts to try to say we should add one, the Gemara says, oh yeah, you're right, you should add this one. So how do we deal with the fact that Rava said you are only lokeh 5? To which they're going to answer, Rava mihai krakamar. When Rava said you get 5, what he meant is you get 5 that are all derived from that verse, from the verse lo tuchal lecho b'sharecha, as we derived all 5 yisurim from there. But he didn't mean that there aren't other isurim. This isur of the prohibition of kalil tiyeh would also be applicable here as well. Okay, I just want to mention that there's a whole debate here when they say lilke, and it's a little bit strange. Do they really mean you get lashes? When he says lokeh chamesh, not everybody thinks you actually get 5 sets of lashes for this. What it means is there's just 5 prohibitions here for what you did, but you don't necessarily get lashes for all of them. Again, it's a side issue that comes up in the Rishonim and a whole discussion about it. I'm not going to get into the details. You should just know that there's a debate here about whether when we say lokeh, do we really mean actually get lashes, or do we mean it's just an additional prohibition? Now we're going to go to a statement of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav. First, we're going to have one statement he says. We're going to say this is a problematic statement, and then we're going to change what he said and said it's clear he didn't say that. He must have said something else. So I'm Rav Gidel, I'm a Rav. Kohen she'achal michatat v'asham lifnei zrika lokeh. A kohen who eats from the chatat and the asham before the blood is sprinkled gets lashes. My time. Or where do we learn this from? Ta'amar kra v'achlu otam asher kupar bahem. Now it says, right, you eat them asher kupar bahem. Right, this is again by the miluim. Says the kohanim are supposed to eat them because they get, right, if or when, right, asher kupar bahem, when there's been atonement, which means lachar kaparain, when the atonement happens. And the atonement happens, it's a good daf because we're going to get in a few months to, well, we'll get to chulim first, but then zvachim, where we're going to learn all about the sacrifices, and we're going to learn a whole bunch of principles today that apply to sacrifices. So the blood that we sprinkle is actually the atonement. So until the atonement, because it says achlu otam, they eat them, asher kupar bahem, once it's been already, the atonement has happened, we learn from there lifnei kapara lo. But before the atonement happens, no, you can't, right? You can't eat it. And from there we get, they call it a lav haba michlala say lavhu. If you have a negative prohibition, which is derived from a positive one, right? Because notice the pasuk's worded in the positive. It doesn't say don't eat it. It says they eat them once the atonement happens. But from there we learn that before the atonement happens, they can't, and that's what you call a lav haba michlala say, right? If I say you have to do something, it means if you don't do it, right, it's forbidden. From there we say you get lashes. Now, this is a bit tricky because usually we don't say this. And in fact, that's what the Gemara is going to ask. And that's why they're going to reject this statement of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav and say it can't possibly be Rav Gidel said this in the name of Rav because there is no negative prohibition. This is a positive. From positive, you can learn negative, but not, you can't get lashes from that. So Mativ Rav, and that's what Rav is going to disagree about right now. He's going to quote it from a very well-known pasuk about kashrut in the Torah. It says, "V'chol be'ema mafreset parsha v'shosat shesa shtei prasot ma'alat gera be'ema ota tochelu." Right, these are the signs of a kosher animal: split hooves and chewing its cuds that you can eat. Now, if it says that's the animal you can eat, what can you infer from here? Ota tochelu ve'em be'ema acheret tochelu. Right, it's pretty obvious from there that you can't eat an animal that doesn't have these. Right, if their hooves aren't split, they don't chew their cuds, you can't eat it. Well, if you would then say, okay, so michlal lavat hashomeahin, or right, lava ba michlal asehu, the negative that comes out from a positive commandment would be a negative commandment. You would get lashes for that. That's what the assumption would be from the previous. But ika de kamarta, if that's true, et zel lo tochelu lamali. But zel lo tochlu lamali. There's a pasuk that says, but you can't eat these animals, right? The ones who don't. So you don't need to say that if you can already derive that from the positive formulation. So why is there a negative formulation? Obviously, there's negative formulation to teach you that you get lashes. And that sounds like without the negative formulation, you wouldn't have gotten lashes. So that contradicts what Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav, and therefore they're going to say, and let itmar hachi itmar. It must be, again, it's not that Rav Gidel was wrong in what he said. It must be the transmission of what Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav was incorrect. We kind of got it incorrectly. Must be, he said the following. Now we're going to switch two words. We had a kohen that ate the chatat the asham, which normally the kohen's allowed to eat, but they ate it before the zrika. They get lashes. Now we're going to say that you don't get lashes for that because it's a lava b'michlala. Say it's derived from. Of course, you can't do it, but you're not going to get lashes because it's derived from a positive commandment. But what he said was zal. Okay, we're switching the kohen with a non-kohen. She'achal mechataf asham lifnei zrika patur. A zar who eats the chatat mi'asham. Now a zar is not allowed to eat them, and he does it before the zrika. He's actually exempt. Now, if he does it after the zrika, when the kohen's allowed to eat it, he gets lashes. But if he does it before the zrika, when the kohen can't even eat it either, he actually doesn't get lashes. My time, what's the reason? Now we're going to say the same pasuk. Tamar kra ba'achlua tamasher kupar behem. The kohen eats it, right, after the atonement happens, after the zrika. Kol hecha dekrinam be va'achlua tamasher kupar behem krinam be v'zar lo yochal kodesh. If you remember, the pasuk there said, but a zar can't eat the kodesh. So now they're going to say, when is the zar commanded not to eat the kodesh, that he'll get lashes for it? Only when the kohen actually could have eaten it. And therefore, since in this case the kohen couldn't have eaten it, the zar isn't going to get lashes because it was done before zrika. So again, let's read it. Right? When it says the kohen can eat it because it's already the atonement has happened, that's when the zar can't eat it and there's a negative prohibition. And if you don't, you're not up to that stage yet because you haven't sprinkled the blood, then lo krina be'vazar lo yochal. Then there is no zar lo yochal. There's no negative prohibition. Okay, and from there we finish section 2 of today's daf. Let's just review for a quick minute. We started with section 1. We finished off and we reinterpreted Rabbi Shimon's drasha. We said it's not learned from a kal v'chomer because that doesn't work. You wouldn't get lashes from that. In the end, it's learned from the fact that there's 2 psukim in the same section that repeat the whole long list of all those items. Each one must be listed independently to teach each of the extra isurim, right? Each of the extra prohibitions that we learned. Then we got into this statement we quoted previously at the end of yesterday's daf. The Rebbe said, "Zar shachamana ola lifnei zrika chutz l'chomar." Right, this case it has 5 prohibitions. Then we asked 4 questions: why doesn't it have this one? Why doesn't it have this prohibition? Why doesn't it have that prohibition? Why doesn't it have that prohibition? 3 of them we answered. The 4th one we couldn't answer. To which we in the end said that Rava actually meant 5, all derived from that one pasuk, but there could be others as well. Okay, that was actually, there's 3 sections we did. That was section 2. Section 3 was the statement of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav, which we said can't be. So we had to reinterpret it and say what he was talking about is a zar who eats from the chatat yasham before zrika won't get the lashes. Now we're going back to bikkurim. If you remember, we had the Mishnah. The Mishnah said if you eat the bikkurim, if the kohen eats the fruits, if when the owner hadn't read the mikra bikkurim, then the kohen gets lashes. Then, right, it was clear that that's only Rabbi Shimon's opinion, and Rabbi Akiva, who holds like Rabbi Shimon, but it's not, or Shimon holds like Rabbi Akiva, but it's not the rabbi's opinion. The rabbis think what we call kriya is not ma'akev, okay, ma'akevet. Not reading it doesn't prevent you from doing the bikkurim. Okay, that's the important thing we're going to need to know. It's a big machloket here. And now we're going to see different opinions about this machloket. So later, people, now we're in the Amoraitic time period, and we want to see what people hold. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bikurim hanacha ma'akevet behem, kriya ein ma'akevet behem. Okay, he says, placing it near the altar, that is critical, but not reading. Okay, this clearly goes against Rabbi Shimon. So now they say, Mi amar Rabbi Elazar hachi. Could it possibly be that Rabbi Elazar said this? V'hamar Rabbi Elazar amar Rabbi Yoshaya. He said in the name of the same person something that contradicts. Now, you need to know for this is, you can bring bikkurim. We always think of bikkurim associated with Shavuot, but you actually can bring it from Shavuot all the way until Hanukkah. However, when it gets to Sukkot, there's a bit of a switch. From Shavuot to Sukkot, you bring it and you read the Mikra Bikkurim. But if you bring it after Sukkot, if you delayed for some reason, and you bring it between Sukkot and Chanukah, then you don't do the Mikra Bikkurim, because there it says, "V'samachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem," you rejoice before God. And the assumption is the rejoicing happens from Shavuot until Sukkot when you're gathering the crops. After that, you're not gathering any crops anymore. There's no happiness of being able to, reap the new fruits. So you don't say the Mikra Bikkurim. So now he says the following. Hifrish bikurim kodem lachag. If you separated them before, so now, what's important is if you didn't separate the bikurim till after Chag Sukkot, you definitely don't have to do the reading. But here it says if you separate them before the Chag, before Sukkot, and then avar lehem chag, but you didn't actually end up bringing them, so you separated them, which means they actually have an obligation to read upon them. But then you only brought them after Chag, and you're not allowed to do the reading at that point. You're kavu. You have to leave them to rot, meaning you've ruined your opportunity to do the mitzvah, because you have to read, but you can't read because it's too late to read, and therefore you have a problem. Again, if you had designated them after Chag, you would have no problem after Sukkot, because then you wouldn't even have an obligation to read. But since you designated them before and then didn't bring them, you actually have to leave them to rot. Now, what's the reason? It's obvious what the reason is, because you can't read. Otherwise, there's no other difference here. Isn't it not because you can't read? Now, if you say the kriya is not critical, you can manage without it, which is what Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. You don't need to do the reading. I like the rabbi's position. Amai your kavu. Why should they have to rot? If it's not make or break, then it should be fine. So just bring it without. Kid Rabbi Zera, they say the answer is like this. The Amar Rabbi Zera, in other words, based on what Rabbi Zera says, we can explain Rabbi Elazar's position. We've learned this many times. If you can mix it, if it's possible to mix, this is all about the mincha offering. If you put too much, right, you're not allowed to make a mincha with too much flour in one bowl, because it's not able to be mixed. But because remember, it says mincha b'lula b'shemen, right? We say this in our davening all the time. It's mixed with the oil. But if you can't, let's say you don't mix it. If you could have mixed it, meaning you didn't put, what happens if you put too much in a bowl and you try to mix it, everything spills out. So if you put it too many in a bowl, then, and you didn't mix it, it's a problem. But if you put enough that could have been mixed, but you didn't mix it, it's fine, because at least you could have potentially mixed it. So that's what they're saying here. You could have potentially read it and you didn't read it, that's fine. So kriya is not ma'akevet according to Rabbi Elazar if you bring it between Shavuot and Sukkot. But if you bring it after and you can't call it, if you can't possibly mix it in the meal offering, or you can't possibly do the reading because it's after Sukkot and you're not allowed to do that reading anymore, then not reading it actually ruins it. Okay, then it's a problem. And therefore, then Rabbi Elazar fits all together. And you can explain Rabbi Elazar that he really thinks the kriya is ma'akevet. It's necessary. Okay, sorry, I think I said before accident. Right, that, the first one where he said kriya ein ma'akevet b'hem. Sorry, let me correct myself. He holds like the rabbis. The kriya is not critical. But if you need to do kriya and you can't do kriya, it's a problem. Okay, so as long as you bring your bikkurim until Sukkot and you didn't do the kriya, it's fine. It's only if you designated them before Sukkot and you were obligated in kriya, and then you brought them at a time when you couldn't possibly do kriya, then by not doing kriya, it's ma'akevet. Okay, but generally it's not. Rav Acha bar Yaakov manelakid Rav Asi. He's a Rabbi Asi, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Now, he had a whole different version. He said it wasn't Rabbi Elazar who said it in the name of Rabbi Yoshai. It was Rabbi Asi who said it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And then when he brought that, he said, B'kashele to Rabbi Yochanan. Then he said, so now let's go back. Basically, that means that Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that bikkurim, hanacha ma'akevet, you must place it before the altar, but you don't have to do the reading of it. Okay? That's not ma'akevet. So now they're going to say, but then comes Rav Acha, who said, quote this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said, but Rabbi Yochanan contradicts himself completely, because mi amar Rabbi Yochanan bikurim hanacha ma'akevet behem kriya ein ma'akevet. We have a problem with both those things. Number one, he said you have to place it down. Without that, it disqualifies them. And number two, he says you don't have to do the reading. Well, Habai mine Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question: bikkurim ematay mutarim lekohanim. When can the kohanim eat them? Which is exactly our question. What permits them? The ones that you could potentially read when you read them. V'she'ein root, meaning, again, or any ones you bring between Shavuot and Sukkot, you have to read them. It's the opposite of what he said. He said Kriya isn't ma'akevet. And she'ein ru'yin lekriya, what if they're not? You can't do Kriya, right? Meaning you brought them between Sukkot and Hanukkah, Mishara'u Pnei Habayit, when they enter into the temple. Okay, when they get into the temple area, then, which is really the Azara, you bring them into the Azara, that permits it. Now notice, it doesn't ever say that you have to place them there near the altar. So now we have two contradictions. Number one, he says Kriya is essential. Number two, he says Hanacha is not important. It's not critical. Kasha Kriya, Kriya Kasha Hanacha, Hanacha. So the way we're going to resolve each of these contradictions is to say there, when Rabbi Yochanan said each one, he was not saying it in his own name. So it's true he said two contradictory things, but he was talking in the name of different Tanaim, because he's an Amora, and he was basically quoting Tanaitic sources, Tanaitic rabbis. So here, let's go. Kriya lo kasha, this is easy. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanit. We know that Rabbi Shimon said you have to do the Kriya, and the rabbi said you don't have to. So when he said you have to do it, that was Rabbi Shimon. When he said you don't have to do it, that was the rabbi's position. But Hanacha, we didn't yet see a debate, but now we're going to see a machloket about this. Nami lo kasha Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanit. So now we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda's position. They're not, okay, we're going to see what's the machloket between them and what's it based on. And that will take us to the end of today's daf. My Rabbi Yehuda Titania, Rabbi Yehuda Omel, Vihinachto Zotnufa. Okay, now we're going to quote psukim here. We're quoting from, right, the bikkurim. Okay, we're in Dvarim Kavav, which is the section of the bikkurim. We're starting with pasuk Yud. Vatayne veti, right, this is your declaration. Et reshi pri adama asher natata li Hashem, vihinachto lifnei Hashem lokecha. And I'm placing it before God. Now, what does this mean? I'm placing it. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Zot Shnufa. This doesn't even mean placing it. This means waving it. Ataomer Zot Shnufa, but the braita says, classic midrash halakha, are you sure this means Shnufa? It says you place it. It sounds like you place it, not you wave it. Oh, Eino ela hanacha mamash. Does this not mean placing it actually? So they say, no, but look at a different pasuk, Shuomel, okay, in the same chapter 26, verse 4, which is 6 psukim earlier, it says, V'lakacha kohen atena miyadecha, the kohen takes the tena, the basket from your hand, V'hinicho lifnei mizbach Hashem lokecha, and places it before the altar. So it already says hanacha there, so this hanacha must not be that. And we're going to read it inside. Shuomer v'hinicho hare hanacha, or that's hanacha. Ma hamani makayim v'hinachto. So what's this hinachto? If not, it must be something else. Zot nufa. This must be waving. Now, you have to understand here something critical that we're going to see a lot when we get to Zvachim, which is there's a principle in the world of Kodshim. There's a lot of details we're going to learn about the sacrifices. And if something, it's a big question among the rabbis, what is critical, essential, and what is not. And they have a rule that if something is repeated, that means it's essential. If it's not repeated and it's only said once, then it's not essential. So Rabbi Yehuda thinks the hinachto is only mentioned once, because the second time it actually means to wave and not to place. And therefore, it's not critical, and therefore hanacha is ena ma'akevet. That's when Rabbi Yochanan said it, it's not, hanacha is not ma'akevet, he was talking according to Rabbi Yehuda. Uman tana de palagalil Rabbi Yehuda, who's the one who disagrees and on what basis? Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, he did Tanya. As Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says in a braita, "V'lakacha kohen atena miyadecha," as we said, he takes the tena from your hand. Limed ala bikkurim shetuinim tnufa. When he takes it from your hand, in a minute we're going to see how we get from there to waving. That means to wave. Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, which means that hinachto doesn't mean to wave, which means that you have hanacha mentioned twice, which means it's critical. And that already answers our question. But now we're going to see how does he get miyadecha, that's tnufa. My time to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, ati yad mishlami. Ktiv v'lakacha. Okay, we're going to have a gezerah shava that goes in both directions. So v'lakacha kohen atena miyadecha, from your hand. That's the word hand. Uktiv, in the shlamim it says yadav tivi'enu et ishe Hashem. The hands of the person bringing the shlamim actually brings it. Okay, they bring it in their hands. Now, what does that mean? They bring it in their hands. It means they wave it. So first we're going to learn, and there it talks about shnufa there, about waving. So the first thing I'm going to say is yad appears by the kohen. He takes it with his hand. Since the hand in shlamim is waving, the hand here is also waving. But we're going to learn in both directions the Gzera Shava goes, and therefore we're going to learn something else from this Gzera Shava. Right? That we said, Makan kohen aflalan kohen malalan baalim afkan baalim. Notice the subject. The person who does the waving in our pasuk is the kohen in the bikkurim. The person who does it in the shlamim pasuk is the owner. But since we have a Gzera Shava that the same word appears twice, we're going to learn from one to the other. In the end, we learn that the kohen and the owner waves it together. Okay? How do they do it together? So the kohen puts his hands under the hands of the owner, and they wave it together. That taught us, again, that was all to resolve the fourth part of today's sugya. I'm not even going to bother going through the first three because we already reviewed them. But the fourth part was this issue of the machlokot about whether bikkurim, the hanacha is ma'akevet or the kriya is ma'akevet. And we saw here that there's a machloket and different opinions about it. And we saw two parallel sugyot. Either Rabbi Elazar in the same name of Rabbi Yoshaya said, or Rabbi Yochanan said that hanacha is ma'akevet, kriya is a ma'akevet. Kriya is not essential. The first time we brought a contradiction about the kriya being essential from a different statement of Rabbi Elazar, but we resolved it. In the second version, we brought a contradiction in both the hanacha and the kriya, and the way we resolved it was by saying each time Rabbi Yochanan spoke, he spoke in the name of a different Tana, both for the kriya and for the hanacha, and thus finishes today's daf. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.